Greetings everybody around the world. It's time once again for Ancient Aliens Radio. This is the dedicated radio show for the cast of Ancient Aliens. Here we interview authors and researchers as an ongoing investigation into the ancient alien theory. Don't forget to like us on Facebook or subscribe to the YouTube channel Ancient Aliens Radio. And in just a moment I'm going to be talking to Maria D. Jones. She's the author of an awesome book, Viral Mythology, who has co-authored it with Larry Flaxman. Larry Flaxman's not here today, and I'm hoping that Marie's going to fill in a little bit of his bio as well. Let me tell you a little bit about Marie before I bring her on. Maria D. Jones is the best-selling author of Destiny versus Choice, the scientific and spiritual evidence behind fate and free will, 2013, End of Days or a New Beginning, Visiting the World After the Events of 2012, Science, How New Discoveries in Quantum Physics and New Science May Explain the Existence of Paranormal Phenomena, and Looking for God in All the Wrong Places. Maria co-authored with her father, geophysicist Dr. John Savino, Supervolcano, the catastrophic event that changed the course of human history. She's also the co-author of 1111, the Time Prompt Phenomena. And the list goes on and on and on. Maria is also a radio host, and she is also an extensive background in metaphysics, cutting-edge science and the paranormal, and has worked as a field investigator for MUFON, which I'm extremely interested to hear about. And Maria is in the west coast of America, linking up with Ireland today. So without further ado, let's bring on our guest for today. Hi, Marie.
Well, hi there. Thank you for having me.
Wow, it's great to have you today, Marie. What an interesting guest I have today. I have an author, I have a radio host, and I have a prolific researcher as well.
A little bit of everything, huh?
Oh, these are my favourite guests, Marie. The people that dabble in a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And yeah, first of all, I mean, tell me about you. I'm always interested in the person first, Marie, before I find out about what gets them as an author. What do you like to do? What is the radio show a big thing for you? Do you like exploring stuff on shows as well?
That actually came later. I'm since childhood, I've been an avid reader. I just devour books. I remember reading 5-6 books a week as a child, possibly more.
Wow.
Excuse me. But I also loved going outside. We lived in New York. We had woods and a lake behind our home, and I loved to go out and explore. And I was really into the stars and planets. And because my father was a scientist, I think I grew up with a real appreciation of science. But I also knew in my heart that there was a sort of unseen reality that got me really interested in things like UFOs and ghosts and spirits and the whole paranormal field. And as I got older, I'd always been writing since early childhood. And I wanted to do and be so many things, as most kids do. But as I got older, I realized, wow, I could do that as a writer. I get to explore everything. I get to research everything. I get to try this and try that. So to me, it was kind of like writing was a natural way for me to be everything that I wanted to be as a kid. But, just didn't have time to do. Mm-hmm. And the radio show I got into a while ago, we're actually not airing right now because my co-author, Larry, and I, we're so busy being on other people's shows right now that we put our own show on a bit of a hiatus.
Wow. It's a bit full-time, I guess. Yeah, it must be very interesting having a physicist for a father. I have a physics degree myself. It's academic. I've never really used it, but I'm in engineering myself. My father's an engineer, and I just appreciate the education I got from my parents because, it's having a father figure like that definitely instills some principles in you, Marie.
No doubt. I mean, I think I learned how to research from my dad. My mom was the real creative, imaginative storyteller, and my dad was the scientist, and his specialty was geophysics and seismology, which was fun because he would travel all over the world. Every time there was a major earthquake or volcanic eruption, my dad would go on site, and in the Great Alaska earthquake, he was there, and then he would come home and show slides and just show some of the pictures of the different countries. He had been to Russia, China, everywhere. And I just grew up loving nature and science, and I wanted to be an astronomer for the longest time. And so I got that influence from my dad, definitely. A lot of the books that I would take out at the library as a kid were science related, whether they were about astronomy or the oceans or tracking wildlife. But at the same time, I also had this, imaginative storytelling side that was going on since I was really young. I was, from what my mom tells me, I never shut up. Wow. I was always telling stories. So I kind of had to find a way to put the two of those together.
Sure. Okay, Marie, I'd love to get you back on at some point to talk about UFOs and MUFON and that. But just briefly, I suppose, tell us how you fell into the MUFON thing then.
Well, the weird thing was, since I was really young, I was always interested in UFOs and aliens. I think a lot of it was because as a child I loved to read science fiction, because I don't remember ever having any kind of UFO encounter that early on. But the funny thing was my dad, a lot of his colleagues who were very well-respected scientists in different fields, they would get together now and then in our kitchen in New York, and they would drink beer and sit around the kitchen table and talk about UFOs. I always thought that was so odd. Here's a bunch of scientists talking about UFOs. And we had a neighbor who lived across the street who was an amazing artist, and he was really into UFOs. And he came over one day, and I was really young, and gave me some books, including Flying Saucers and the Three Men, which was a classic. So as I got older, I was obsessed. And then I remember Close Encounters of the Third Kind came out in 1977, and I saw that movie to date over 150 times.
Wow.
But I joined MUFON in, I want to say the early 1980s, and I was in all through the 80s and into the 1990s. When I lived in Los Angeles, I was a member of MUFON in Los Angeles, and I was on the board of directors. Excuse me, getting over a little cold here. Then I came to San Diego, and I started a group in the area that I lived in because there was no group there. Wow. And I just, to this day, everything I've written about, UFOs are kind of like a first love for me.
Mm-hmm. Do you know Kathleen Marden then?
I know a lot of people. I might have actually met her at a MUFON gathering, but I know a lot of people in the field. One of the reasons why I stepped back was to write. Obviously, I began writing full-time about 10 years ago or so. And I found, that's such a commitment. And there's a MUFON group here in San Diego that I wanted to go to. But it really is a commitment of your time to go to meetings, to train. Even though I was already trained, you've got to keep your training up to date so you can do the investigations. There are a lot of amazing people in the field that I look to. If I'm writing a book, I look to them to get my research from because they're out there in the trenches.
Sure. Okay, Marie, we're here today to talk about viral mythology, how the truth of the ancients was encoded and passed down through the legend, art, and architecture. Before we get into the book, Larry's not here today, your co-author. Can you tell us a little bit about Larry, and tell us about your collaboration, how you guys work together, how you guys know each other, and a little bit about Larry himself?
Absolutely. It kind of came across in a real weird way. He, about 7 years ago, he read my book, Science, which is spelled P-S-I-E-N-C-E, and it's sort of about the science behind the paranormal. And he had read the book, and he loved it. And he emailed me, along with about 1 million other people, to just say, how much he loved the book. And we just sort of hit it off. He had a website and an investigative group, Paranormal Investigations, and he said, check out my website, see what you think. And we really just hit it off. Became fast friends, even though he lives 1,700 miles away from me in the state of Arkansas. I'm in California. Mm-hmm. And we decided that, it might be kind of fun to collaborate on something. So I said, well, listen, I've got a publisher waiting for me to, pitch my next book. Why don't we think about writing a book together? And so we did. And that book was 1111, The Time Prompt Phenomenon, which has been a big bestseller for us. First book together, that was really amazing because that doesn't happen a lot. And since then, I think we are now on going on our 8th book together. Wow. So just even though I hardly ever see him in person because he lives so far away, we've spoken twice at conferences. We just, we talk on the phone constantly, email, Facebook, just constantly communicating, and, you know, we've managed to put out a really nice body of work together, and we're going to continue to do so.
Sure. That's the beauty of the modern world we live in today, Maria, networking and how we all, I think, you know, in the last 20 years, people really, really network now, Maria. Distance is not a problem anymore, especially with the internet age.
It's global.
It's global,
But, you know, it's weird because I find myself, even with my close friends who live 10, 15 minutes away, you know, we don't see each other as often because we could just keep up via text or Facebook. So, yeah, it's definitely got its huge benefits, but I hope people don't forget the pleasures of, you know, face-to-face contact.
Mm-hmm. Sure. You know, it's strange. Here I am sitting in the very, very top of Ireland, in a remote part of Ireland on the top of the coast, but I go out on 7 different networks across Spain, UK, Ireland, and half of America as well. It's like, and I simultaneously broadcast in 3 or 4 networks, and I Skype people a lot. You know, it just fascinates me. I have a bunch of radio hosts that I network with, and I just love it. I love what, you know, the world has given us with the internet age.
Oh, absolutely. You and I probably wouldn't be talking now were it not for the internet, because it would be really hard for us to get in contact with each other.
And I guess research too, Marie. I mean, research has blossomed, and certainly the alternative history genre, you know, it's really, really blossomed, Marie, and you know.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, we're now aware of information that we wouldn't normally be aware of, and I guess that's probably a good tie-in to bring in the book at this point, because you have coined the phrase viral mythology, and I suppose, give us the premise for the book. Give us how you've coined that phrase and what viral mythology really means, and that phrase and that significance of that.
Well, we wanted, you know, Larry and I were thinking, okay, what could we write next? We had just come off of 2 books, a book about time travel, and we had written a book called The Grid, which just came out a few months ago, and that really was sort of a culmination of our research into the paranormal. And so we were thinking, yeah, we'd like to do something a little bit different, not paranormal or UFOs or quantum physics. Let's do something different. And what had always fascinated me, and I know the same for Larry, was, you know, is there any science behind stories, whether they're Greek or Roman or Norse mythology, or the stories that you read in the Bible or the Torah or other religious texts, fairy tales, legends, you know, urban legends, folk tales, even nursery rhymes. We wanted to know if there was any information encoded in those types of stories that had been passed down from our ancestors, and how we could find a way to interpret them today. And that sort of led into the idea of viral mythology. The idea that even back in the time of our ancestors, whether we're talking ancient or primitive times, there were ideas and information that went viral, just like it does today with YouTube and Facebook and social networking and email and texting and instant messaging. But we wanted to know what information went viral back then and what it means to us today. So that sort of exploded into this book about really information. Are we getting all of the information from the past that really gives us a good idea of what history was really like? Are we being cheated? Mm-hmm. Are we talking about lies and rumor and misinformation? So it just really kind of took off into this exploration of how an idea might get to us over the course of 2, 3, 4, 5,000 years.
We've just explained, Marie, how the internet age works today and how information
Absolutely.
gets. You know, how does it happen in ancient times? How does this knowledge get transmitted across cultures, across time spans, across seas, even?
Right, and okay, so we've got to remember, because we're so spoiled today, we forget that there was a time in the past where there was no internet, no cell phones, right? Not even TV or radio, which allow for the communication of ideas and information and even entertainment very quickly. So if you're talking thousands of years ago, how did ideas get from one region to another? How did information on how to build a pyramid, or how to erect a henge monument like Stonehenge or Easter Island, or, how did information get to other people? And there are a few different theories, and of course, word of mouth. It would have taken a long time but it very well could have been that word of mouth was at play. Because you had a lot of nomadic tribes back then that were taking their ideas with them to each new area that they were discovering. And so, of course, they would spread those ideas as they went along, and that allowed for information on how to do something, how to cook something, what kind of animals to hunt, what kind of mushrooms weren't edible that would poison and kill you. It allowed for all that information to eventually spread over different regions. Another interesting theory, and the one that's probably the most popular, is the ancient aliens, ancient astronaut theory. Wow. And that's the one that everybody's really into today.
You've been on Ancient Aliens yourself recently, Marie, have you?
I have. I've been on a couple of times, and it's a really intriguing show. I'm not sure that everything they claim had to do with aliens really did, but they're right on in a lot of ways because there's so much evidence in the past in our art, in our symbols and glyphs and images that look like aliens, that look like interaction with aliens. And that's a possible way that information was taken from one group or spread to another. Or, as a lot of theorists say, the aliens themselves imparted their knowledge and information on us, which counted for these huge gaps, these huge leaps, I should say, of technology and understanding. But there are a lot of other ways it could have happened. It's like today, you have different groups that believe different things, and everybody has evidence for their own pet theory, which I think is really interesting because every theory that you can come up with, there is evidence to back it up. So it's kind of like, well, we're stuck here today trying to figure out in the past what happened thousands of years ago without any real first-person witnesses to talk to.
Mm-hmm. I guess, I've had a lot of the Ancient Alien crew on the show. Half the cast must have been on the show so far, Marie. So it's nice to have another guest from Ancient Aliens. I'm totally open to that. Just recently I have come across an article, I've had some people on talking about the Nephilim and fallen angels and that they had like a shine off them, and that it's strange because there's these giants in China that were referred to as having a shine off them. We've also got mythological tales in Ireland of the Tuatha De Danann, who were known as the Shining Ones as well. So.
Right. Where did that come from? How did that get from one region to another? Yeah, and oftentimes around the same time in our history. Yeah, so it does make you wonder if somebody other than us, or just if you had alien intervention, you had to figure that probably happened on a more global scale where every culture was affected by it. So they included that in their myths, in their stories, in their religious texts, in their paintings, in their cave and rock art, if you want to go back even further.
But if we're talking something like pyramids, Marie, that's maybe like a nice building plan, a nice standard of a building to build. So that's maybe worthwhile it going viral in the first place, these mythological concepts that we now...
Oh, exactly. If something worked, if something had... and that's one of the ways that things go viral today that also applies to whether we're talking ancient or primitive times, is that if something goes viral, for example, the structure of a pyramid is very functional for and especially in a spiritual sense, because it represents going from the ground to a pinpoint of perfection in the skies. It's sort of like the as above, so below belief, that, it was present in a lot of the architecture in ancient times. So if you wanted an idea like that to spread, that idea had to have some practical use. It had to be useful. Engineering,
mathematics, philosophy, harmony with nature, the golden ratio encoded into it, the astronomy encoded into it. So,
yeah. If it was meaningful to...
Esoteric even in a way.
Right. Esoteric, if it was meaningful to one group of people on a deep level, chances are they were going to be more passionate about sharing that information with other groups of people, because those are universal understandings, and those are things that maybe they affect us on a subconscious level, because a lot of times they're very symbolic. They might not necessarily be in your face like the architecture of today, but we understood it. Excuse me. So it made sense for them, for anyone really. And if you think about this today, when you spread a piece of information to someone, chances are you're doing it for the very same reasons they did thousands of years ago. One, it was educational or informative, practical, right? Useful. Two, it was entertaining.
Sure.
Or three, it was something that they needed to know in terms of survival, which is why in a lot of the earliest cave and rock art, you see a lot of images of animals that were hunted at the time. You see a lot of warrior images. You see a lot of rituals surrounding women being pregnant or menstruating. These all had to do with very survival-based elements of what these people were living at the time. And they may not have fully understood the science behind them, but they understood that these were important enough that we need to somehow get them down.
Even shamanic art as well,
right?
like maybe consciousness art, if you want to call it that, or shamanic art, seems to be prevalent.
So symbolic.
Yeah, symbolic.
But you look at it, and you kind of get it on a different level. Even though you might not be able to consciously pinpoint what it is about that image that really affects you, you know that it affects you on a much deeper level.
There's quite a lot of art all around the world, rock art, cave art, linking up. Like, I mean, the spiral, for example, is probably a really good example in Chaco Canyon in Ireland, in Malta. The Dogon in Africa, they use it as well. Like, so that's probably one big example, but, same symbology, the same art. And I think rock and cave art are a really good example of, something primitive, not like a pyramid, something primitive in terms of artistic expression.
Exactly. Cause that's how we expressed ourselves. Think about as a child, we drew pictures with crayons or markers or whatever they have today. Now they do them on computers, but back in the day, when you were very young, you didn't write or speak very well yet. So your communication was very crude images that you drew with crayons or markers on paper. And then you graduated up to speaking, and then you graduated to a written language as you learned the alphabet, and you learned the writing system that we have today. And so that same progression, that same evolution occurred back then. So their rock and cave art, their carvings, their images and symbols and glyphs, they were trying to tell us something. But that was all they had to work with at the time, because they had not yet developed a writing system or an alphabet system that was going to work for their region. So it's up to us today, unfortunately, to look at that art and try to figure out what they were trying to tell us. And it's so easy to misinterpret because, again, we weren't there.
Did we see an evolution, Marie, in the art, in sophistication or advancement?
I'm sorry?
Do we see like an evolution in the style of the art or the symbology?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because we kind of moved out of the sort of crude, first, a lot of scratches and lines and markings that look like they may have just been trying to communicate in numbers, maybe how many herd of sheep they had or how many animals they saw that could be used later for food. And then it became more symbolic again with pictures of people interacting with animals or warrior scenes or pregnant women. And then it sort of graduated to pottery and ceramics and mosaics. And eventually we began painting on canvases and, doing murals. So as we evolved as humans, our expression through art evolved with us. And we started to be able to say more because our art got more sophisticated. If you look at a painting, excuse me, from, ancient Rome, sure, compared to 50,000-year-old scratchings on a wall in a cave, you're definitely going to be able to get more out of that painting. But believe it or not, those scratchings on the cave were just as important to those people as the painting was to the artist of the day thousands of years later, because it's all about expression. So if your only way to express something is to scratch marks on a wall, that means a lot to you. You're trying to say something. It's up to the person interpreting it to figure out what it is you're trying to say.
Sure. The advent of writing then is a major part of our story then, because once that you express through writing, let's talk Sumerian, for example, the oldest written record. I mean, you're very familiar with that being on Ancient Aliens, no doubt, but what a civilization the Sumerians were. Like, you know, that was really a key pivotal point for us to transmit knowledge, because that was the first episode we had.
Yeah. And a lot of people will say that was the time, and, you know, obviously possibly earlier, but that was the time in history when we did see a huge leap in advancement. And was it possibly because of some alien intervention? Yeah, there's an awful lot of evidence to point to that with Sumerian stories and myths, with some of the images that obviously look like they're depicting some starman or some kind of astronaut or person from another world. But at the same time, when we just assume that, I think we sell ourselves as human beings short, because a huge leap in advancement doesn't have to come from an outside source. Sometimes it just happens in a more evolutionary, organic sense.
I like to have
it's like a snowball. The more humans rolled down the hill of knowledge, the more we accumulated to the point where we were making leaps in technology and in how we expressed ourselves. So we really didn't need the outside help.
I have a bi-philosophical concept. I like to think both. I think, we do a lot ourselves, but I think we did have a helping hand at times. I don't think it was all given to us. I think there was bits of it given to us. And
right. I agree. I actually agree with you, because, again, if you look back, there's just so much imagery that points to something coming out of the skies. There's so many stories, and it doesn't matter if you're talking about the Far East or the Near East or the Middle East or, you know, the early history of the Americas, or it doesn't matter what culture. They all have these stories. So you have to start thinking to yourself after a while, there must be something to this. Globally, there must have been alien visitation, because it did affect every different region. It is in their art. It is in their stories. It is in how they believe they evolved. I mean, you have some stories where they're literally admitting that there was communication, and they might have called them angels or demons or spirits or gods and goddesses, but we could easily replace any of those words with the word alien, and those stories would make a lot of sense.
Do you think then, if they were, let's say we have some species outside our own Earth or whatever, you know, that they want to teach us something, that the best way to do that is through monumental architecture, art, or complex art, or complex monuments like pyramids and stuff? Do you think that's a great way to encode the information to teach us? I think so. Yeah, I also think that those monuments may have been erected in honor of what people were learning from the aliens, of what information they were getting. You learn about the connection between the heavens and earth, and you learn about these different golden ratios and number sequences that have metaphysical properties, and all of a sudden now we start erecting these huge monuments that seem to be astronomical observatories, or like the case with the pyramids, where you have certain tones, musical vibrations, certain frequencies that if played inside, say, the king's chamber, can put you into an altered state of consciousness. We might have been given all of that information, or even bits of it, and then we turned around, and maybe they helped us build them, because obviously we still don't know how the pyramids got up the way they did. But it almost seems like they're in honor, like they're monuments the same way today we have monuments to fallen soldiers. We have monuments to great figures throughout history. So, yeah, it could go either way there. Either they helped us build them, or we built them because of the help that they gave us. Wow. That's a nice way to look at it, I suppose, Mary. That's a nice way to look at it.
Well, I walked by a Vietnam memorial here a couple of weeks ago, and that thought just came in my head. Isn't it funny how today we build statues of people that are important in our history? And obviously here in the States, those people will be different from where you are. You're going to have your own heroes that you will erect monuments to. Mm-hmm. But I thought, wouldn't that be funny if the Easter Island statues, or the big giant heads that were found in Inca civilizations or, Stonehenge or what have you, as well as being ways to observe what was going on in the heavens, were also sort of done as a way to honor who brought us this information.
Mm-hmm.
Could be.
Yeah, without a doubt. You coined the term also archaeoenigmas, which I haven't heard before. I know archaeoastronomy and archaeoacoustics, but for the listener, tell us what an archaeoenigma is, and let's talk about some examples of these out-of-place artifacts and in time and technology.
Right, out of time and out of place. And Larry and I found the term archaeoenigma. There's a site on Facebook that we both had been aware of where people were posting images and information about all these unusual objects that have been discovered or that are considered to have been, they shouldn't have been there at the time, or they were far older than anything else that was ever found in that location. Well, we call them oops and oots. Oops is O-O-P, objects out of place, and a oot would be O-O-T, an object out of time. So some of these would include things like there's one called a Baghdad battery, which was actually found in the 1930s in a little village near Baghdad. It was an actual working battery, and it was said to be from a time when, well, hey, we didn't have batteries. And most people will agree that the battery was invented around early 1800s. But here was this several thousand-year-old object that literally worked.
It's awesome. It's absolutely mind-blowing. I've actually seen it there's several in the British Museum, but I've had the pleasure of seeing it. I don't know if it's on display anymore.
Electricity. This was found again in Dendera, another Egyptian discovery called the Dendera light bulb.
Mm-hmm.
And, it looked exactly, it had a little wire cable connection, just like a regular light bulb does. And yet this was thousands of years old. Now we know that the light bulb was not invented until much later.
Sure.
Yet, where did this come from? Was it something that somebody like a Tesla of old, or an Einstein, or who's the other one? Thomas Edison.
Yeah.
Was there like a 5,000-year-old Thomas Edison back then creating these amazing things?
It even looks like there's a filament in the Dendera lamps. It looks like there's actually a filament inside the... And I like to think that they didn't have a glass bulb. I think that was like a paper mache out of a translucent petal. That's the way I like to think about that.
Right. And the thing is, again, people will say, well, we've always had mavericks, we've always had geniuses. And even today, there's a genius somewhere in his basement thinking up an item that we can't even imagine what it does. It's just so futuristic. Couldn't that have happened then? Couldn't you have had people who were somehow very advanced in their thinking and were thinking in terms of electricity or the use of batteries or, this, that, and the other thing. But then you have the other side of the fence where you have people who say this is proof, and I wouldn't say it was proof, of ancient alien intervention, where you had extraterrestrials coming along, showing us this technology, leaving behind little clues that are now being dug up today.
Mm-hmm.
And we're throwing our hands up and saying, oh my gosh, where did that come from?
Mm-hmm.
But they were left behind by these, civilizations from other worlds that came and said, hey, we have this really great idea. It's called a battery, a spark plug, electricity, what have you.
Sure. I think there's another object, the Nineveh lens. It's a crystal lens from Nineveh in the Middle East, or Nimrod lens sometimes it's called, and it's mind-blowing because it's got it's like a corrective index, like magnifying glass in a way, and it's made out of crystal, which needs either crystal or diamond to cut it. And I think there's a lot of crystal objects that are unexplained too, Marie. And this is evident high technology.
Yeah, and even the knowledge that crystals are so unusual in their properties, their geomagnetic properties.
Mm-hmm.
Did somebody just figure that out on their own? Some savant or prodigy or genius? Or again, is this evidence that we had a little bit of help from civilizations that were more advanced than us who knew about all this? This was just old hat to them. And they came and they visited us and said, look, here's this and here's what it does. And then thousands of years later, we invented it on our own.
Do you think?
Because if you think about it, a lot of this stuff has been either buried and still hasn't been discovered. There still haven't been excavations that have uncovered everything. I can't even imagine what's still out there buried. But also, as a lot of people will tell you, it seems like a lot of these archaeoenigmas are suppressed once they are discovered.
Yep.
Some of them, they just downright disappear so that modern researchers can't get a hold of them and take a look at them. You know, who's suppressing this? Who is hiding these objects away so that we can't really continue to date them properly or do research on them? That's kind of a misfortunate thing, I think, because are they being suppressed for sinister reasons, or are they just being set aside because they don't buy into the version of history that we've all been taught? And were we to have to change history because of these objects, it would really be disruptive to a whole lot of people.
Yeah. The Antikythera mechanism is another fine example of an archaeoenigma.
That's probably the most widely known, even though people have a hard time pronouncing it, including myself. You did a great job, boy. This was I believe it was discovered in the early 1900s. It looked like a big clock. When you look at it today, it almost looks like to me, it almost looks like one of the wheels, like on an old ship that they turned, but it was a clock-like mechanism. It actually was, I guess, dated at the time to 150 BC.
Yeah, around that time,
these kinds of objects then. Yeah, it was very sophisticated. It worked somewhat like a very basic computer. Somebody even described it as the world's first analog computer.
Yeah. And they reckon it wasn't replicated until the 14th century in England, when the clockmakers really got kind of sophisticated again. Right.
And I know that even later, a lot of Swiss clocks that were created 100 or 200 years ago really ended up looking like this mechanism. It's funny how, I don't know that every single person who's ever built a watch or a clock knew about the mechanism. But it just shows the natural progression of thought and evolution. So somebody found this, somebody built this device, or somebody gave it to us.
Sure. As an engineer, you can understand why I appreciate this stuff. I think the big question for me is, in my own journey, Maria, I look at the engineering and the technology and I want to explain it as human ingenuity. But when I look at it with an engineering eye or a scientific eye, I scratch my head and I say, this is high tech against the odds. If you give me high tech in this day and age, I go, yeah, that's great. But you give me high tech in ancient times, I'm going, I think these guys had help. And it's like a stepping stone for me, a natural stepping stone for me to believe in an ancient alien hypothesis.
Well, see, I think somebody like you, being an engineer, should be able to look at every single one of these objects. Because I think what happens is, an object like this might be discovered, and in this case, it acts like this sort of astronomical, mathematical computer, calculator, what have you, at a time when there should have been no such thing invented, unless it was given to us again. The problem is, a lot of times when these objects are discovered, they're not looked at by people like yourself, who can really say, in terms of engineering, this should not have been around 150 years before the birth of Christ. What happens is you have a lot of people who don't really have a scientific background at all, just looking at it and saying, oh, this is really weird. Well, but it's possible that humans at the time could have developed it. I mean, it is crude because we're looking at it through the eyes of today's standards, so it looks incredibly crude to us. So people misinterpret how sophisticated that device might be because they're looking at it through a limited knowledge of the engineering feat that must have been. And they're also looking at it in terms of today's explosion in technology, where, even an old computer from the 1970s looks crude and primitive to us.
Sure.
So it's really unfortunate that, you have that misinterpretation that occurs because of people that are not really trained to look at, like you said, how advanced and sophisticated these objects might have been.
And Marie, I look at this today, you see, and I'm like, there's 7 billion people on this planet, but how few of those people know how to work the telescopes, know how to work the computers, know how to build the computers. The technological race of people on this planet, and statistically, is a very small, significant portion of that 7 billion. Most people don't know how to use the technology, or work the technology, or design the technology. It's a small percentage.
Just use it, right? Yeah, and we take advantage of that. I mean, we absorb this technology as if it's just created out of, nothing.
Yeah. And I mean, that's fine, Mary. That's fine. I mean, there's great, my idea of intellect is somebody who can do a painting. I have no idea of art. I can't paint. I couldn't paint to save my life. Me
neither. I can draw stick people. That's about it.
That's it for me. So that appeals to me more than anything. Now, so that's not to take away from that other type of intellect, but really, this left brain world, this construct that we have, it's a bit of a handicap in a way, Marie.
It is. But, I think we all have our advantages. You have the advantage of being able to look at things and understand the complexity, the sophistication. I don't have that. I tend to look at things from the idea perspective. As a writer, I can't do art, period. I mean, I was terrible in school at art. Wow. But so I look with the same fascination as you do to someone who can do an amazing painting. Mm-hmm. It's like their worldview, reasons why our ancestors had to find different ways to communicate information so that it would get passed down to everybody in some way or another. I look at a big piece of architecture, whatever. The pyramid, it's kind of triangle, whatever. An engineer would have a much different appreciation of that pyramid because of the way that it's built and, how difficult. And I understand that because of the research I've done. But I could look at a beautiful painting and not quite get all the intricacies that an artist would. So I think that's why our ancestors knew the importance of putting information in everything they did, whether it was imagery, whether it was stories or the written word, oral traditions that they passed down. And again, their buildings, because at the time, architecture was so much more important to them as it is today. Today, it's all about money.
Sure. Let's talk about
how many houses can you fit into a 100 square foot.
Oh yeah, it's all about the dollars today. That's for sure. Marie, let's talk about religious texts, because it's not technology and pyramids and objects are not the only example we have.
Well, I grew up a Roman Catholic. Mm-hmm. And like anybody, I remember reading the stories in the Bible and wondering, did this really happen? These people real? And I know everybody else did as well. Well, what's interesting is that when you look at some of the common imagery that's found in religious texts, because a lot of it is story that was created to convey history. So a lot of the people in the Bible and any other religious text probably did live. A lot of the events described probably did happen, but there seems to be a lot of myth, a lot of fiction superimposed over those facts, so that it becomes the job of those of us today who are interested to try to dig out the fact from the fiction. But one of the things that people will point to over and over again, whether it's religious texts or myths, because I think mythology was a type of religious or spiritual story that our ancestors told, mm-hmm. Is that you look for the common motifs. What was everybody writing about, no matter what part of the world they lived in? And, one of them is the flood story.
Oh, yeah.
How common that was to so many different mythologies and even religious texts, including the Bible, the Noah's Ark and the Great Flood, and how this flood myth, it just shows up everywhere. It shows up throughout religion, throughout mythology. It doesn't matter whether you're Greek or Roman or Norse. There's a flood somewhere in your past that was written about. So why is this? Well, chances are there was a real flood, and a lot of scientists now believe that probably occurred about 12,000 years ago. There was some catastrophic event, possibly a close call with a comet or an asteroid that caused a great flood to occur. And so what you had was everyone who was alive at the time trying to find a way to deal with and process that catastrophic event, what it meant to them in terms of their loved ones drowning or them losing everything they had or having to literally pack up what little they had and get to higher ground somewhere. That became literally a part of the fabric of who people were at the time. And that's why it shows up in all of the different stories. Another one is the virgin birth. Here's another motif that we think is just Christian, but it's not. It shows up in the virgin birth in Egyptian mythology. It shows up in Buddhism. I mean, Buddha was born of a virgin named Maya. Now, Maya sounds an awful lot to me like Mary.
Wow.
And then the green man. That's one of my favorite common motifs because it's a sort of a pagan symbol for the worship of nature, for the worship of, Pan or whoever your sort of god of nature was at the time. And you see green man symbolism in many different regions, and they all look the same, too. It's like, how did that happen? Because they all seem to appear on the scene at the same time. So I'm fascinated with comparative religion and mythology because of that, because a lot of the gods and goddesses that even were sort of hinted at in religious texts, you can find a mythological god or goddess with the same properties, the same abilities, the same characteristics.
Wow, fascinating, Marie. So, I mean, how's these? Give us some theories of how the information is accessed or passed down. Is it accessed or is it passed down like a lineage or?
Okay, I'm going to read these through because there's a bunch of them.
Yeah.
So, we talked earlier about ancient alien, ancient astronaut theory. That's probably the most popular because it's really exciting. It's exciting to think that happened. But you know what? Word of mouth, viva voce in Latin, the passing of information from person to person, from group to group. Oral traditions have continued to this day. We have oral traditions that were passed down to us from our own ancestors as well as on a more collective scale. The problem with oral tradition and the passing down of information via word of mouth is that by the time it gets to the 10th or 20th or 30th or 3,000th person, that story has probably completely changed. And we know that when we hear a rumor, right?
Yeah.
A rumor that's been spread through a number of people is so much different from the information that the very first person got who then spread the rumor. Another popular theory that I really learned a lot about was cultural evolution. And this is just the idea that as we evolve physically, we're also evolving in a cultural sense. And it's happening at the same time, at the same rate for every group of people. Doesn't matter where they are on the planet. We go through physical evolution. Obviously, we look a lot different now than we did thousands of years ago. We're also going through a cultural progression as well. And so a lot of these ideas, almost in a genetic sense, could have arisen at the same time because we as a collective species were going through a similar evolution. That's another popular one. And again, there's all kinds of research that shows that each of these different ideas could be possible. Another one is through the use of memes and memetics. Today, how we have popular memes on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. We have images and ideas that literally just explode. Well, probably the same thing happened then, but it happened a lot slower. And they had to have been ideas that were, or beliefs or rituals or traditions that were important enough for them to feel they needed to pass on to the next generation. Another one is something called mind viruses. And what I love about this is the idea that a number of people's brains can be infected at the same time with an idea.
Wow.
We've heard the 100th idea that, eventually something is going to jump from one island to another or one region to another as it progresses through the species. I like that idea because I like the fact that even today, I see a lot of evidence of society getting an idea in a collective sense at the same time. Some people say that and Larry and I wrote a book called The Grid, which we feel could explain one of these theories that Carl Jung talked about the collective unconscious. The grid is similar. The grid is this sort of collective web of connectivity of realities where you literally have people tapping into the unconscious at the same time and pulling out information and ideas that apply to where they're at in their own physical evolution. And this can happen to more than one region at a time. And again, just travel. We've had people say things like, if you have groups that are nomadic and they're traveling, eventually the information that they're carrying with them is going to spread to the next group, and it sort of snowballs to the next group. So, unfortunately, we weren't there. Could be a combination of all of these. It could be a few. It could just be, one. But those are some of the valid ways that we think information spread, and also how it got to us today.
Well, I don't like to rule out, Marie, like ancient seafaring. A lot of people don't want to touch it because, we don't want to accredit the ancients crossing vast seas when we think we did it. And it's all about Columbus discovering America. But, we've got ancient maps there, Marie, going back, God knows how long. So...
Oh, absolutely. We have a lot of unusual artifacts here in North America, in the United States, that suggest that the Vikings may have been here long before Columbus did.
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful way for things to go viral. Because again, you're talking about word of mouth, but it's happening a little bit quicker because they're coming over on a boat. They're not trying to walk across the ocean, obviously, or swim.
Yeah.
So ideas are going to spread at the rate of, whatever it is that the people are using as a means of transportation. Obviously, a guy on horseback is going to be able to take a piece of information to another village a lot quicker than somebody who's walking. Mm-hmm. You've got a large group of people coming over on ancient vessels. They're bringing with them all of their knowledge, their ideas, their information about what works and what doesn't, about here's how we do this, here's what we believe. Religious traditions, religious beliefs, they spread the same way. Somebody comes up to you and says, hey, this is what I believe. And you say, well, I believe this. But, once that person tells you their belief, you start to consider it. Mm. So your own view of the world begins to shift a little bit. Then you pass that on to the next person. Mm. So I absolutely agree that is.
I mean, they talk about the Phoenicians being master mariners, and I would accept the Phoenicians, Marie, that, these guys were super sailors. They were able to go wherever they really wanted. And they talk about the copper deposits in North America and
right.
feeding the Bronze Age in Europe. And I'm open to that. I'm totally open to that. So,
I think you have to be, because again, it would explain, without bringing the alien picture into it, it would explain a lot of the weird artifacts.
I don't think it explains everything, though, Marie, and that's the key thing. I like, that's why I say I like to have that bi-philosophical concept. There's two scenarios. I think.
Right. The big leaps and the small leaps.
Yeah. And I think you need to recognize them, and I think you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and you can't also turn around and say it was all alien. So, I think you have to use your head, and a lot of people would just go, oh, ancient aliens, they did everything, and that was it. And it's not as simple as that, Marie. It's
right, exactly.
Yeah.
And a good way to look at it is, how does information spread today? Does it just spread through the telephone, through cell phones? No, not at all. It spreads through radio. It spreads through television. It spreads through people getting together and talking. It spreads through the computer and the internet and everything that brings to the picture.
It has to seep in. It has to seep into the consciousness, Maria, in its own pace, in its own way.
Right. And then when it seeps into enough consciousnesses, you have a sort of tipping point where that idea becomes accepted, or it becomes a part of who we are as a species.
Sure. So, Maria, you have a chapter on hidden wisdom and secret truth, and not all information was allowed to go viral. There was a lot of it kept behind closed doors. Do I say secret societies going back that far? I don't know. But, stuff was encoded in the tarot. And let's talk about some of this hidden history, some of the stuff that wasn't allowed to go viral.
Yeah, and I think we still see this today with, conspiracy theories and the idea that not necessarily talking about, putting on the tinfoil hat, but there's always when you have authority figures that are as powerful as the Catholic Church was for a long, long time in our past, or you've got certain political authority figures that are in office, there are going to be people who believe that some information is not allowed to be made public, and so there's got to be a different way that you can pass that on. There's also the idea that not everything happens in a very transparent public sense. There's a lot of things that happen under the radar, and that's what a conspiracy is. Really, it's something that was conspired to be kept secret. When we talk about our ancient ancestors, we're talking about things like, the Inquisition and the Crusades and religious wars that were fought to try to suppress one belief system, one tradition, excuse me, and put another one into power. So throughout history, we've had groups of people, whether we're talking about the Rosicrucians or the Knights Templar or the Cathars, who supposedly had some very powerful secret that they were all slaughtered to keep secret. The Masons, the Freemasons, that's probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, when it comes to secret societies that are believed to have had information, wisdom, spiritual wisdom, knowledge, possibly even scientific knowledge, that for whatever reasons, the authority figures of the day did not want made public. So it was up to these very under-the-radar groups to keep that information pure and to pass it from one generation to another. You also had people who put imagery in paintings, in tarot cards, playing cards. So tarot cards were really developed just to be playing cards, just like the decks that we have today. But some of the later decks were full of imagery that was said to be occult and to pass on metaphysical and esoteric knowledge to those who had the wisdom to see it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it was encoded in writing. There are a lot of codes that people use. I know the Bible code has been sort of disproven, and yet there are other examples where the written word has contained clues and hints. You have to kind of read between the lines.
Marie, just to jump in there, it's strange because somebody submitted some stuff to the show for me to review. It's actually like like a tarot deck made out of crop circle images. So it's like a modern tarot deck, if you will, but really, really nice and really sophisticated and really well done, Marie.
Gorgeous.
I can see it going viral because I think they're a really classy deck of, it's bizarre, because it's got all the numerology and all what each crop circle's about and what it symbolizes and all. And so it's kind of like it's like a perfect example of what you're actually talking about, Marie, in the modern
right.
sense.
But again, what's hard with that in any tarot deck is trying to properly interpret it. Is this just a deck somebody came up with because it's really pretty?
Exactly.
Or was it just functional, or does it actually have some kind of symbology in it that can tell us about alchemy or, laws of science that we don't ordinarily know about? So that's where the interpretation thing comes into play, is that we don't know the real motivation behind so many of these items or objects or paintings or cards, even the secret societies, because we're not there to witness firsthand what their motivation was, what their agenda was. Yeah. So it's left to us to look at the clues and try to interpret them properly based upon what was happening at the time. So you have to kind of go back in history to when tarot cards were created, which I believe was in the 1500s, and what were they thinking? What was the mindset? What was happening politically, religiously? Who are the authority figures? And, again, like I said before, the tarot decks were done just for pure fun. But as time went on, somebody said, hey, this is a good way to make it look like we're just passing a deck along to somebody to have fun and play a game with. But we can encode symbols. We can pass down our ancient knowledge through these decks, and it's going to get to the right people because they're going to know exactly what to look for. So today we're still trying to figure out what to look for.
Do you think we still use symbology as important today as we did in ancient times?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Just go for a walk and look at some of the street signs you see. One of my favorites is the dog with the slash line. Don't let your dog poop on the ground here, or no dogs allowed. Arrows telling us which direction to go. I think street signs are a really cool way of how we use symbols to communicate something. But also, if you look at logos for different companies and corporations, like Nike, Just Do It with the slash mark. I checked that off my list. Just some of the McDonald's with the golden arches. These are American references, I know, but I think we still understand the power of a visual image, how it affects the subconscious mind. Mm-hmm. Once you see some of these symbols, you never forget them, right? Mm-hmm. And the next time you see them, you know exactly what they mean. You don't have to have somebody tell you orally or write down for you, here's what this means. That picture tells, a picture tells 1,000 words. Mm-hmm. So I think we use it today more so. We may not be aware of it as much because we're so bombarded with the written word and people telling us things, whether it's via YouTube videos or news broadcasts or what have you, or entertainment on TV. Mm-hmm. But I think, again, just take a walk through your city and you're going to see a million ways that symbols are telling you something.
Look at the swastika again. There's another fine example from Buddhist times right through to, I think there's an example of it in rock art or rock carving in Italy and Britain somewhere as well.
That's another one of those motifs that is so popular. And people, but the sad thing is we tend to associate a symbol with the most emotionally powerful idea that we have around that symbol. So that's why, excuse me, even though the swastika has been around in different uses for a long, long time, unfortunately will always be associated with the Nazis. Yeah. The cross that is used, for Christianity, that's been around for a long time as well. Yeah. It will now, though, always be associated with Jesus. So, you have symbols that probably meant something else originally, but they've been given a new interpretation based on some phenomenal event in history or a person that became associated with them. So, yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah. You know what I like about the book, Viral Mythology? You've given a nice, refined perspective on the past. Well, actually our future too, but I mean, and the way we process information, but particularly on the past and art and architecture, you're able to peer into the past now, like with a magnifying lens and see a bit clearer because,
right.
Yeah, that's what I like about it more than anything, Marie.
Yeah, I love, this is just me, but I love to look at what goes on today and see if I can apply it to the past. I love doing that. I do it all the time, just sort of naturally. I don't know why. But, when Larry and I were writing the book, we were getting more involved in social networking, but with a whole different perspective, because now we were looking at everything that we heard on the news, everything that went viral on social networking, YouTube videos that had 9, 10, 12 million hits. What was it about those that made them so important? And we started to do some research into what makes an idea go viral. And obviously all of the research that we found was in reference to today. Why does something go viral today? Well, I'll tell you, there are different reasons. Mm-hmm. One, again, practicality. Are you spreading a piece of information like, don't put your tongue on a car battery? That is going to be very practical and useful for a lot of people. 2, emotion, whether it invokes anger, rage, joy.
Humor.
Yeah. Oh, humor is huge. Mm. A third one is pleading to the subconscious, understanding what affects us on a deep, almost archetypal subconscious level. So there's these different ways that ideas go viral today.
Sure.
And guess what, everybody? They worked then, too. Mm. I mean, they probably worked for the first cavemen and cavewomen who told the first joke, who passed on the first piece of knowledge about, hey, that snake over there, don't let it bite you because it bit Joe last week and he's dead.
Yeah.
A story that they heard about another cave tribe where that was so sad that when they retold it, people just started crying. All of those same aspects that allow something to go viral today happen then. They just happen with different means. Today we've got our technological ways of communicating. Well, back then they had word of mouth and talking to each other and oral traditions and telling stories around the campfire.
Serpent mythology as well. And here's another great one as well, Marie. Serpent, whether it's in art, Celtic art, and even St. Patrick chasing the snakes out of Ireland. We didn't have any snakes in Ireland. It was mythological. I think there were serpent cults that were drinking ayahuasca personally, but that's just my own part. But I'm all around the world. Serpents in the Bible. You got serpents everywhere. It's from the Asia to Middle East.
And the sort of morphing that the serpent went through to become almost a satanic symbol.
Demonized.
Yeah, it was demonized, that poor thing. Yeah.
Fascinating. So what are we doing today that the future's going to look at and go, what's the viral of today that's going to, future civilizations are going to look back and go, this whatever happens to us today is the mythology of the future, in other words.
It is. We're creating the viral mythology for tomorrow. And some of it's going to be really amazing. The development of the automobile, going to the moon and now to Mars, and, curing certain diseases, and creating a little tiny thing you can hold in your hand and talk into, the cell phone. There's going to be a lot of things, including historical events, that people 2,000-3,000 years from now will look back and find fascinating about us and be pluses. But there's also going to be a lot of negatives. There's going to be a lot of things that they're very confused by. And those are the more negative things that we find in society. They're going to wonder at the Holocaust. They're going to wonder, but see, they had their own Inquisition, so maybe they'll understand, Maybe that will be the Inquisition of the future. But they're going to look back at us and they're going to deem certain things positive about us as a people and certain things negative. In my opinion, what is going to be most frustrating for civilizations of the future will be our technology. Because by then, who knows what they'll be doing. They probably won't have computers. Their brains will be doing all this amazing computation. And we'll probably have quantum computers implanted in our brains. But, they're going to look back at a lot of the things that we took viral and wonder, certain TV shows, certain images, that they're just going to be shaking their heads saying, what the heck were those people thinking?
Yeah. I'm so excited about quantum computing. I think it's one of the greatest things we can explore.
Yeah, it's be amazing. One of the things that I had a conversation with my mom, of all people, about what our ancestors may look back at. And one of the things we talked about was landfills. Landfills piled high of trash.
Yeah.
We look back at ancient cultures and civilizations. Well, where is their trash?
Yeah.
There isn't a whole lot of it. At least I don't ever recall reading about an archaeological dig where they found a landfill, outside of some site in ancient Egypt.
That's a good point, Marie. Very good point.
Yeah.
I think the most beautiful thing about ancient cultures is that, they although they built all these monumental architectures, from pyramids to, henges and like Stonehenge and circular monuments and standing stones and all this great stuff. But the beauty was they just did what they needed to do. They look at Göbekli Tepe, for example. This goes back eons, but they only needed to build what they wanted to do. They didn't take any more from the land than they needed.
Exactly. And I think that's going to be one of the biggest things that speaks to who we are today for people in the future is our waste, our greed, what we did to the planet, and just the trash, the meaningless stuff, quote unquote, that we leave behind. They're going to look at that and they're going to try to make interpretations about who we are or who we were based upon that. And that kind of makes me sad because there's just so much of it. Do we want to put our best foot forward and put the best viral mythology out? I would think we would, but I don't think it's something people think about. I honestly don't think anybody really thinks about what they're going to leave for the archaeologists of the future to discover and then, make some kind of judgment about who we are today. I don't think people really think about it. Maybe they should.
Is this book, in a way, then, Marie, your philosophy, or has your philosophy developed as a part of writing this book, or tweaked maybe even?
Completely changed. I had so much more respect for even primitive cultures that I thought, wow, were they crude? Because now I understand that they were expressing what was important to them with the means that they had at the time, which were very limited. I have so much more respect for the ancient artists and writers and storytellers because they were trying to assure that the information that they had carried on. They thought it was important. I have a little less respect, unfortunately, for the people of today because we're not thinking about that. We're not future thinking, forward thinking people. We very much just want what we want and we want it now. We don't think too much about the effects that it has for future generations.
The major flaw we have.
So that's a little disappointing, but again, to me, the power of the idea, the power of information, and if you know the ways to make it go viral and make it spread, the power that you can have as a human being, and I think we see that with political campaigns and world religions and the way that certain beliefs and traditions take hold of millions of people. Ideas are powerful. I think that's probably what I got out of writing this more than anything.
Do you think, Marie, that in ancient times that the mythologies that they wanted, do you think there was perhaps an intent for it to go viral? They wanted it to spread fast and they used methods like artistic expression?
I would have to say yes, and I'll tell you why. Because, again, looking at today, as a writer, I want my books to sell. I want people to read them. So when Larry and I sit out to write a book, we are thinking of what would be the most interesting book we could write. What research should we include? What research do we not need to include? When you look at the great writers of today, whether they're writing memoirs or novels or they're writing movies or TV series, I think that their purpose, excuse me, is to not just entertain, but to put ideas out there. You could take the most entertaining TV series. I love Walking Dead. Do you guys get that in Ireland?
Don't know.
Zombie series? Okay, there's a series here called Walking Dead. It's about zombies, believe it or not, but it's so well written because it's really more about what people do to each other when their survival is at stake than it is about fighting zombies. It's a very powerful, emotional show. And there's a lot of them. Breaking Bad is another one that became very powerful here in the States about a teacher who couldn't make enough money to pay. He had cancer, so he became a drug dealer. He literally built a meth lab and became a meth dealer. There are these series that you think, well, they're just pure entertainment, but they're not, because there are deeper ideas that are being put forward that talk about who we are as a species. They talk about humanity. I think the myths probably did the same thing. The people that wrote the myths were trying to entertain, but they were also trying to inform and educate at the same time. And I know that they probably didn't say to themselves, we're going to write this so nobody reads it. I think they really wanted their stories to spread because that was a way for them to spread their ideas and their beliefs and their information that they thought was important, just like it is today.
You have a great way of looking at the world, Marie. We need more people like you, I think.
Oh, well, thank you.
You've got a great perspective on it, and it's enlightening, and it's, it's good. It's a positive thing.
I think that's why I love to write, because I just love when I come across an idea or some information that I think is just fascinating. I want to share it. That's the first thing I want to do. I think it's probably a natural part of who we are. We just want to share what gets us excited or angry or upset or we find hilarious. We just want to share it. We want it to go viral.
Sure. Marie, I haven't mentioned where we can get a copy of the book yet. Please give us out your website. Coming up to the end of the show, where we can get a copy of the book, and tell us about you and your website, and where we can listen to your radio show as well.
Absolutely. I've got two websites. My personal website is mariedjones.com. My website with Larry Flaxman is paraexplorers.com, and that's P-A-R-A, paraexplorers.com. The books are sold. I know that they're available in other countries via Amazon and different online bookstores. Here in the States, obviously, the brick and mortar stores, but I know that they're available worldwide. And we're all over radio at different times, so it's like kind of go visit the websites to keep track of where we're speaking and where we're doing radio.
Wow. Do you have a YouTube channel, Marie?
No, I don't. I hate seeing myself, right? So
wow.
I was kind of like, people have said, why don't you do YouTubes where you're talking? And I don't know. I don't like to see myself. I like to talk and write, but not be seen.
Wow. Yeah, no, like, I mean, some people, yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, some people are, some people aren't.
Yeah, I'm really self-conscious, but I love to talk. I mean, I could talk for hours, like just somebody on the phone or on a radio show. That's my way of communicating information, through the written word and through oral tradition.
Well, that's great, because I'm going to want to get you back at some point, Marie. And I mean, I'd love to get you back on to talk about MUFON and UFOs and your work.
I would love to. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Maybe get you to talk with Larry on another book at some point as well. I mean, you guys are prolific. What's new for you next, I guess, Marie, before we go?
Well, believe it or not, other than promoting the grid and viral mythology, I have 2 novel series coming out this year. So I'm venturing into fiction. One of them is a series I wrote with my son, a 12-year-old son. That's a sort of a science fiction series for kids between the ages of, say, 8 and 13. Oh. And then I have one in the summer that's a young adult paranormal thriller coming out. So it's kind of a fun way to do something a little bit different.
Oh, nice. And Larry, what's Larry's website? Does he have a personal website?
Oh, he does. Larry has a personal website. It's Larry Flaxman, F-L-A-X-M-A-N, LarryFlaxman.com.
Wow. What's new for Larry? Larry's writing as well?
Well, we are working on a sort of X-Files meet Indiana Jones style novel. That's fun because it's our first time to venture into fiction together. Wow. He speaks a lot. The part of the country that he's in here in America, there's a lot of events that he speaks at. And we're going to be speaking together in October. I think that's the first time at the Paradigm Symposium, which is a huge, huge event here in the States. So they bring in speakers from all over the world. So that'll be really fun.
Sure. I know it well. Gary Evans, a good friend of mine, he helps promote it.
That's right, Gary. I know Gary.
You know Gary? Oh, there we go. It's a small world.
You need to come out for that. Come on, fly out.
Yeah, I might do. Yeah, Gary's a good friend. Gary's been with me in Ireland. I'm going to do a tour with Gary in Ireland. He's a lovely guy, Gary. I can't sing his praises enough, but yeah, he's a nice guy, and
yeah,
he does a lot behind the scenes as well as
He does. I see his name all over the place.
Yeah, yeah. No, the Paradigm Symposium looks fascinating. You know, it gets a lot of momentum, Marie. It's nice to see you at that as well. So
they've got some big speakers that have not been announced yet, but I'm not allowed to say who they are. But it's going to be mind blowing. So, yeah, and this will be my second time.
Wow.
The guys who put it on, Scotty Roberts, awesome guy.
Yeah,
awesome
I've had Scotty
writer.
on a couple of times.
Have you had Scotty on?
I've had Scotty on twice. Yeah, I might actually be meeting him in Egypt soon.
Oh, you're going to go on the Egypt tour? I wanted to go so bad. I love Dr. John, too. He's awesome.
I haven't. Well, I was going to have. It's hard to get 2 authors on the show sometimes. You know, it's difficult.
Well, and Scotty's in the States, and John's in Egypt, so that's even harder.
Yeah, and the connection for Egypt's not the best. But yeah, Scotty loves it, though. You know, Scotty's a great talker as well. He can do great radio. So.
When Scotty and I talk to each other on the phone, I'm sorry, but you got to block out a few hours. We love to talk.
Yeah, he's a lovely character as well. He's a great sense of
Yes.
humor as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, all being well, I'm going to meet Gary in Egypt hopefully at the end of March. So I don't know if I can do 2 trips to Egypt. I'm trying to choose. Maybe
no, one
I will.
is good enough.
Yeah, so
It's wonderful. You're lucky. I would love to go some year. I'll have to go on one of their tours one year.
I'm really deliberating whether to do the tour with Scotty or not. You know, it's I'm gonna have to make a decision soon, but
Yeah, it's coming up quick.
yeah, for sure. Well, listen, Marie, we're out of time. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. It really has. I am hoping to get you back on sometime soon, and we'll talk about another book and or MUFON or ufology. You've got so much to talk about, Marie. It would be great to have you back.
I would absolutely love to. We will definitely do that.
Okay. Well, Marie, thank you for your time today. We'll speak soon.
Thank you. Take care. Talk to you soon.
Bye now.